On the 24th of September 2023, two sides played a Premier League match which ended in a 2-2 draw. Yet despite the basics sounding relatively common, this match was far from a usual one. Arsenal and Tottenham are two of England's biggest and best sides, both situated in North London separated by just 4 miles, creating a rivalry of the most incredible, dramatic and unbelievable history. One team was there first and set records, and the other one arrived later and broke them. And despite the fact there's various other Premier League matches between teams even closer in distance, many would argue that nobody else does it like the North London derby. However, despite each clash between the two sides being filled with entertainment, both clubs had fallen from grace in recent years, with one going on a decade-and-a-half-long trophy drought and the other one failing to qualify for the Champions League for 6 straight seasons. But after a summer which saw huge change for everyone involved, a new era of the North London derby may just have begun, where the fixture could potentially reach heights never seen before. Yet before I get onto what the future may hold, I need to start by explaining the origins of this rivalry. Formed in 1882, Tottenham Hotspur found themselves a lonely side on the north end of the city, until 4 years later in 1886 where their eternal rivals Arsenal were founded, with the first fixture between the sides occurring a year later in 1887. Except, this wasn't a North London derby. Originally named Dial Square FC, the Gunners were founded by the workers of the Royal Arsenal factory in Woolwich, South London. And for more than 25 years, the club, now renamed Woolwich Arsenal, stayed south of the river, until in 1913 an opportunity arose for arguably the biggest move in English football history. Having struggled financially due to low attendances, Chairman Sir Henry Norris made the extremely controversial decision to move Woolwich Arsenal to Islington. By this point, Spurs had already become a relatively big team in English football, winning the FA Cup in 1901, and so unsurprisingly the thought of an already established team moving into what they thought was their territory created huge tensions in the area, which would only get worse following the conclusion of the First World War. Up until this point, the English First Division was made up of 20 teams, with 2 being relegated and promoted each season. But with the war having caused a 4-year break to the footballing schedule, it was decided that the First Division should be expanded to 22 teams. This allowed both Derby and Preston North End to be promoted as anticipated, having finished as the top 2 teams in the second division in 1914-15. However, a separate decision had to be made regarding the final 2 teams that made up the top tier. Many people expected these final spots to be given to Chelsea and Tottenham, who'd finished in the relegation zone in 1915. As in previous seasons where the division had been expanded, no teams had been relegated. However, in 1919, a hugely controversial decision was made. Chelsea would be spared relegation having finished 19th, however Tottenham were not, and rather than being replaced by Barnsley who'd finished 3rd in the second division, the Football League instead chose to elect 5th place Arsenal into the top tier, and so with tensions in North London already high between the two sides, a rivalry which had been bubbling up over the previous 6 years exploded into life. Despite having been the original team in North London, Tottenham could do nothing but watch as Arsenal became the most successful club in the city, winning trophy after trophy, and as each year went by, the gap in quality between the two sides increased and the rivalry grew fiercer. With Tottenham often failing to reach the success in league finishes and trophies of Arsenal, it was these Derby Day matches that earned a team bragging rights on the north side of the capital, and of course this led to some very iconic clashes. On the 3rd of May 1971, Arsenal travelled to White Hart Lane on the final day of the season, needing just a single point to win the league, going on to win both the game and the league in their biggest rival's own stadium, something that happened multiple times over the years. 18 seasons later and the tables were turned in 1991 as Spurs beat Arsenal 3-1 in the FA Cup semi-final, lifting the trophy a month later for a then record 10th time. And it was by this point where Tottenham had finally started to catch up to the Gunners and hopes were high in the white side of North London, before this would all change once again in 1996. Specifically, the arrival of Arsene Wenger to Highbury was an event that would help revolutionise the game in England, and 4 years after the introduction of the Premier League, the Frenchman would turn Arsenal from a side falling behind to one leading the changes to the English game. The likes of Anelka, Overmars, Petit and Henry were amongst some of the foreign talent imported into North London by Wenger, guiding Arsenal back to the top of the English game with 4 major trophies in Wenger's first 4 full campaigns, before arguably the most iconic moment in the history of the Arsenal-Tottenham rivalry occurred. This is Sol Campbell. Born in 1974, he joined the Tottenham Youth Academy as a teenager, rising up through the ranks, making his first team debut aged just 18, quickly becoming one of the best centre-backs in the country and captaining Tottenham Hotspur. By the summer of 2001 though, Sol Campbell's contract had run out, and despite publicly assuring Tottenham fans and the board that he would sign a new deal multiple times, he soon announced that he'd actually be leaving the club on a free transfer to play Champions League football, with Bayern Munich, Inter Milan and Barcelona battling it out for his signature. And then, just 4 miles down the road, Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger held a press conference believed to be the announcement of 24-year-old Ipswich goalkeeper Richard Wright. According to reports from Arsenal themselves, only 2 journalists would turn up with a goalkeeper far from a big name in the world of football. Except when Arsene Wenger walked into the room with his new signing, it wasn't Richard Wright, it was Sol Campbell. 7 trophies in the following 4 years took Arsenal and Sol Campbell to the 05-06 season, which would be another historic moment in the rivalry. With tensions having started almost 100 years earlier thanks to Arsenal's move to Highbury, the upcoming campaign would be Arsenal's final at the ground before a move to a new 60,000 capacity stadium just a couple minutes away. And having made it all the way to the Champions League final, which they lost 2-1, the end of this season and particularly the move away from Highbury saw the start of a dry spell for Arsenal, where they would start to fall away from the top. Over this period, Arsenal fans went from celebrating trophies to what they called St Totteringham's Day, which would mark the date in which it was mathematically impossible for Arsenal to finish below Tottenham in the league. However, that would all change on the 30th of April 2017. Arsenal travelled to White Hart Lane in a 2-0 result in favour of the hosts meant for the first time since 1991, Spurs would finish above Arsenal in the league, and ironically one of the most important factors for the change of hands in this rivalry came about around the time of Sol Campbell's move south, where a different man switched sides in the opposite direction. After being released from Arsenal's youth academy at the start of the millennium, Harry Kane was quickly picked up by Tottenham, and by the mid-2010s he'd established himself as one of the best strikers on the planet. Firing Spurs to ever-improving league finishes, by 2019 Harry Kane had become the top scorer in North London derby history, and for a 3rd straight season Tottenham had finished above Arsenal in the league, with the club even reaching the Champions League final 13 years after the Gunners, however would be unable to go a step ahead after losing it to Liverpool. And just days earlier, Arsenal had been in their own European final in the Europa League, similarly losing it to another English side in Chelsea, and by the end of the year, both teams had sacked their managers after terrible starts to the campaign, with Jose Mourinho and Mikel Arteta coming in before back-to-back seasons where both teams from North London missed out on Champions League qualification. Fast forward to the end of 2021 and Jose Mourinho had been sacked by Spurs with Antonio Conte now in charge, and after a disappointing start to life, Mikel Arteta's rebuild was finally starting to get going, where with only 2 games left of the season, Arsenal travelled to Tottenham needing just a single point to all but seal Champions League qualification ahead of their rivals. That wouldn't happen though, as a Rob Holding red card helped Tottenham to a 3-0 win, who'd go on to finish above the Gunners in the league for the 6th straight season before the following campaign, where the dynamic would shift once again. Since hiring new managers in 2019, North London's 2 sides grew more and more dissimilar, with Arsenal sticking by their man and building an attacking ideology, compared to Tottenham, whose managerial merry-go-round had created a defensive style of play and results that weren't sustainable. Arsenal would win 3-1 at the Emirates on the 1st of October 2022, before another win away from home a few months later, marking the first time in almost a decade where one team would win both North London derbies in a Premier League season. The gulf in quality only gets more clear when you look at the league table, with Arsenal challenging for the title compared to Spurs, who dropped down from 4th to 8th and missed out on Europe entirely. Critically, despite having been the better team for 6 years, Tottenham had failed to capitalise on what could have been, and after a terrible year last season, star player and the fixture's top scorer Harry Kane left North London for pastures new.
Spurs have their new coach, and it is Ange Postecoglou. So Tottenham Hotspur have confirmed.
Ange Postecoglou, a manager known for his attacking footballing philosophy, arrived in England and instantly got to work to try and close the gap with their neighbours. A number of exciting and impressive deals were then made by the Australian, all for a net spend of just over €50 million. These signings would quickly settle in, and after 5 games the club found themselves second in the league and unbeaten, with a near identical record to Arsenal before the North London derby on the 24th of September 2023.
Set back by Madison for Son! Spurs silence the place! Saka. His poise is immense! Jorginho has lost it to Madison, and Madison can drive, and Son is in! 2-2 in no time! No time at all!
An intense rivalry which has had incredible moments, twists and turns at almost every point imaginable may be about to enter a new period where the two teams are battling out for the biggest accolades in world football for the first time ever. And in a world where sides like Chelsea have shown that money doesn't necessarily equal success, two historic clubs doing things the right way to reach the top of the world's biggest league could just catapult this rivalry to dizzying new heights.